Behind every story lies a truth waiting to be uncovered. Click subscribe and let's uncover it together. I used to believe I knew every corner of my husband's soul. We had been married for over 15 years. We built a home together, raised children together, and survived storms together. At least, that's what I thought. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. He was successful, charismatic, admired by friends and neighbors, while I was the steady, supportive wife who managed the household and always stood by his side. But perfection has cracks, and sometimes those cracks hide secrets so deep they can shatter everything in an instant. It all began one evening in the most ordinary way. We were sitting in the living room. He was scrolling on his phone, half smiling at the screen, while I folded laundry. It should have been a peaceful moment, the kind you barely remember the next day. But that night, I noticed something different. His smile wasn't the casual grin of someone reading a joke online. It was sly, private, like a smile meant for someone else. And when I asked what he was laughing at, he quickly locked his phone and mumbled, "Nothing, just work." Something in my stomach tightened. For the next few weeks, I saw it again and again. The glow of his phone late at night, the quick swipes to hide the screen when I walked into the room, the sudden trips outside to make a call. And the smile. Always that smile. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. After all, paranoia can poison a marriage as much as infidelity itself. I wanted to trust him. But trust is fragile, and once doubt creeps in, it grows like a shadow you can't get rid of. One night, when he left his phone on the counter and stepped into the shower, I finally gave in to temptation. I picked it up, my heart hammering in my chest. And there it was, messages from an unknown number, written in a strange mix of symbols, abbreviations, and a language I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, I froze. Most wives at this point might feel helpless, blocked by the wall of another language. But I wasn't most wives. You see, before I got married, before I devoted myself to being a wife and mother, I had another life. I studied linguistics. Languages fascinated me. Their rhythms, their codes, the way people hide meaning between words. Back in college, I even dabbled in cryptography, learning how codes could be cracked with patience and pattern recognition. He never knew this about me. To him, I was just the wife who stayed home. He thought I had long abandoned my intellectual pursuits, my studies, my love for languages. But standing there in my kitchen, holding his phone with shaking hands, I realized he had underestimated me. The first few messages looked like nonsense, strings of letters, odd punctuation, half-formed words. But as I scanned them, memories stirred. Memories of long nights in the university library, deciphering old texts, practicing translations. My fingers itched to grab a notebook, to start mapping the code. And then I saw it. A phrase I recognized. A mocking word, one I had heard in that very language years ago, when someone insulted me during a study abroad trip. My blood ran cold. These weren't random codes. These were messages meant to exclude me, meant to belittle me. And they weren't from a coworker. They were from her, the mistress. At that moment, 100 emotions surged through me. Rage, betrayal, humiliation. But above them all was something stronger, determination. I would not be the clueless wife they laughed about behind closed doors. I would not be the silent victim of their so-called clever secrecy. If they wanted to speak in code, they had chosen the wrong woman to deceive. So I made a decision that night. I would play along. I would let him think I was blind, oblivious, too naive to see the truth. But behind the scenes, I would translate every single word, every mocking insult, every plan, every betrayal, because knowledge, I knew, was power. And soon enough, the language they thought would protect their secret would become the very weapon I used to destroy their lies. This, my friends, is the story of how a hidden skill, buried for years, became the key to uncovering my husband as deepest betrayal. And how the truth, no matter how cleverly disguised, always finds a way to break free. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen with his phone in my hands. The screen glowed faintly, lighting up the cold cup of coffee I hadn't touched. My fingers trembled as I went back through the messages, translating them one by one. Each word cut deeper than the last. Pet names, private jokes, little promises of a future that didn't include me. And then the insults, sharp, mocking, humiliating. She called me la vieille sorcière, the old witch. I could almost hear her laugh as she typed it. I had doubted myself for so long, convincing myself that maybe I wasn't enough, that maybe I had somehow pushed him away. But the truth was right there in black and white. It wasn't about me. It was about them. About their selfishness, their arrogance, their belief that their secret language would keep me blind. The bitterest part of all was that Ethan knew I could speak French. Years ago, when we traveled to Paris for our anniversary, I had slipped easily into conversation with the locals, and he had teased me about sounding more Parisian than American. He had looked at me then with pride. How could he forget that? Or maybe he hadn't forgotten. Maybe he had just assumed I wasn't paying attention anymore, that I was too naive, too trusting to notice what was happening right in front of me. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I remembered the warmth of those days in Paris. The way he held my hand as we walked along the Seine, the way we laughed over wine in a small cafe by the river. That memory twisted into something cruel now, as if it belonged to strangers. The man sleeping in my bed was not the man from those nights. Somewhere along the way, he had slipped away from me, into someone else's arms, someone else's language. I thought about calling my sister, about spilling everything to my best friend, about sobbing into the phone until the ache in my chest eased. But the words caught in my throat. Once I said them out loud, there would be no going back. The image of my marriage, the life we had built, would be shattered. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. This was something I had to carry alone, at least for now. The next evening, I decided to test him. I made his favorite dinner, lit candles, set the table as if we were just another happy couple. He walked in late, muttering excuses about a meeting, his phone buzzing in his hand like a guilty heartbeat. I smiled, poured his wine, and asked him softly if he ever missed Paris. The question hung in the air, casual on the surface but loaded with meaning beneath. His fork froze midair for just a second, his eyes flickering with something he tried to disguise as surprise. Then he forced a laugh, muttering something about how it had been years ago. I said nothing, only smiled, but inside I saw him clearly. That flicker of panic was all the confirmation I needed. Later that night, while he slept, another message came in. Ne t'inquiète pas, mon amour. Elle n'a aucune idée. Tu es à moi. Don't worry, my love. She has no idea. You are mine. My chest tightened, but instead of despair, I felt something else. Resolve. She was wrong. I did have an idea. And the more they believed I was blind, the more powerful I became. In the days that followed, I became two people. To Ethan, I was the same wife, smiling, supportive, predictable. But behind that mask, I was watching, documenting, translating every word, saving screenshots and tucking them away like weapons. Each message was another crack in their illusion of secrecy. Each insult, each plan they whispered to each other in French only made me stronger. One afternoon, I found her name signed at the end of a message. I searched it, and there she was, smiling in photos, sipping wine in Paris cafes, captions written in 2 languages as if to show off her charm. She was young, glamorous, perfectly polished, but her eyes gave her away. I recognized the hunger there, the emptiness. She wasn't just after my husband. She was after my life. The home, the security, the history that came with me. And Ethan, blinded by vanity, couldn't see it. That night, lying awake beside him, I realized I wasn't going to explode in rage. I wasn't going to beg or cry or throw his phone at him like he expected. No, I was going to wait. I was going to let them believe in their illusion, let them think their secret was safe. And when the moment was right, I would let him know that I had understood every word from the very beginning. As I closed my eyes, one thought repeated itself over and over. You think you're clever, Ethan. But you've underestimated the wrong woman. The night everything unraveled began like any other. Ethan came home late again, his tie loosened, his excuses practiced and smooth. I had stopped listening to the words. What mattered was the phone he tried so hard to keep hidden. I had been patient, biding my time, collecting every piece of evidence like a hunter waiting for the perfect shot. And tonight, I was ready. We sat at the table in silence. The meal grew cold between us, untouched. He scrolled absent-mindedly, smirking at whatever message flashed across the screen. I sipped my wine slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Finally, I said quietly, almost tenderly, "Do you love her?" The words seemed to slice through the air. His hand froze, the phone halfway to the table. For a moment, he looked at me as if he hadn't understood. Then the blood drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving his. "Je sais tout, Ethan. Chaque mot, chaque mensonge." My voice was calm, deliberate. I know everything, every word, every lie. He dropped the phone then, the clatter echoing against the hardwood floor. His mouth opened, but no sound came. I had spoken to him in the very language he thought would keep his secret safe. And in that instant, he realized the fortress he had built with her was nothing more than glass. Fragile, transparent, and already shattered. I picked up the phone from the floor and placed it on the table between us. With one swipe, the screen lit up, revealing the latest message from her. Another declaration of love, another cruel jab at me. "She thinks you're mine," I whispered, my voice shaking not from weakness but from the weight of suppressed fury. "But she doesn't know you never belonged to her. You belong to me, to us, to this marriage." He buried his face in his hands, muttering excuses, apologies, words I couldn't even register anymore. My ears buzzed with the memory of every insult, every stolen kiss I had uncovered in those messages. All I could see was betrayal, written in a language that was supposed to be foreign, but to me was as clear as daylight. I stood then, my chair scraping against the floor, my legs trembling but unyielding. "Do you know what hurts the most, Ethan?" My voice cracked, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "It's not that you cheated. It's that you thought I was too stupid to notice, that you believed I was blind, that I would never understand. You mocked me with her, in her language, while I sat right here in the same house, in the same bed. That is what I will never forgive." He reached for me, desperate, broken, but I stepped back. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the weight shift. The power wasn't his anymore, it was mine. I had stripped away the lies, laid bare the truth, and now he stood exposed, small, pathetic. The silence that followed was suffocating. He whispered my name, begged me to listen, swore it was a mistake. But all I heard were her words, echoing in my mind, mocking me again and again. And I knew then that nothing he could say would erase them. I turned away, my hand brushing the phone one last time. "You thought your secret was safe, Ethan. But the whole time, I was listening." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving him with the wreckage of his lies, the cold dinner on the table, and the sound of a marriage collapsing under the weight of truth. I didn't sleep that night. The house felt like a stranger's place, every shadow heavier, every sound sharper. Ethan tried knocking on the bedroom door, his voice hoarse from begging, but I didn't answer. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone still in my hand, the screen black but filled with every ugly truth I had uncovered. By morning, something inside me had shifted. The woman who spent weeks doubting herself, questioning her worth, had vanished. What remained was cold, clear resolve. I could no longer cling to the illusion of our marriage. The love I once believed in was gone, and all that was left was choice: stay in the ashes of betrayal, or rise from it. When he walked into the kitchen, his eyes bloodshot and his shirt wrinkled from a night on the couch, he looked more like a defeated man than the confident husband I had once known. He tried again, his voice soft, almost pleading. "Please, let's talk, we can fix this." It didn't mean anything. I met his gaze without flinching. "You want me to believe that months of messages, months of lies, Months of mocking me in another language meant nothing. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The calmness in it seemed to cut him deeper than any scream ever could. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. For the first time, I felt no fear of losing him, because I had already lost him. And strangely, that realization was freeing. The chains of denial, of self-blame, of waiting for scraps of his attention, they were gone. Later that day, I gathered the evidence I had saved. The screenshots, the translations, the timeline of their affair. I placed them in a folder, not out of vengeance, but out of preparation. If Ethan tried to twist the truth, if he dared to paint me as irrational or paranoid, I would have the facts. For once, I was the one in control of the narrative. I didn't confront him again with shouting or accusations. Instead, I called a lawyer. My hands trembled as I dialed the number, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I was no longer asking for clarity. I was demanding justice. That evening, when Ethan saw the packed suitcase by the door, his face crumbled. He begged, he swore, he even cried. But the tears meant nothing to me now. They were too late, too shallow, too rehearsed. "I gave you my trust, Ethan," I said, my hand resting on the suitcase handle. "And you threw it away. You thought I didn't understand, but I understood everything. And now I understand one more thing. I don't need you to survive. I don't need you to be whole." As I stepped out of the house, the weight lifted. The air felt sharper, cleaner, filled with possibility. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold. Pain, healing, maybe even hope. But it would be mine. My path. My choice. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me steady. And I knew with absolute certainty that this betrayal would not define me. It would transform me. The first few weeks after I left were a blur. The silence of my new apartment was heavy at first, a reminder of everything I had lost. No footsteps in the hallway, no shared meals at the table, no familiar voice filling the space. I cried sometimes, quietly, when the memories slipped in. But with each day, the tears came less often, and the silence began to feel different. It stopped being empty. It started becoming peaceful. Ethan tried to reach me. Calls, messages, even letters slipped under my door. I didn't answer. He begged me to forgive, promised that he had ended it, swore that he would never betray me again. But the promises meant nothing now. Once, I would have clung to them like lifelines. Now, I saw them for what they were. Desperate words from a man who had only realized the value of what he had after it was gone. Instead of listening to him, I listened to myself. For years, my voice had been drowned out by his excuses, his charm, his needs. Now, for the first time, I asked myself what I wanted, and the answer was clear. I wanted freedom. I wanted dignity. I wanted a life not defined by betrayal but by strength. I threw myself into work, into projects I had once set aside because Ethan needed my attention. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had drifted away from during the years when my marriage consumed me. I took long walks through the city, headphones in, letting the music drown out the echoes of the past. Slowly, I began to rebuild, not just a routine, but myself. One evening, weeks later, I sat with a glass of wine by the window, the city lights flickering below. My phone buzzed again, Ethan's name on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, instead of answering, I blocked the number. It wasn't anger that guided me, but clarity. I didn't need closure from him. I had already given it to myself. The folder of evidence, the screenshots, the translations, the proof, remained tucked away in my drawer. I never needed to use it in court, because Ethan didn't fight me when the divorce papers came. He signed them quickly, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear. In the end, the truth had already broken him before it ever reached a courtroom. What surprised me most was how light I felt once it was done. I had carried the weight of suspicion, betrayal, and secrecy for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. And now, with the past behind me, each breath was my own again. I wasn't naive. I knew healing would take time. Trust would not come easily, and scars don't vanish overnight. But I also knew something more important. I had survived. I had faced the ugliest truth a marriage could hold, and instead of letting it destroy me, I had walked away stronger. That realization changed everything. The courtroom had fallen silent. The final verdict echoed like a thunderclap in everyone's ears, sealing the fate of those who had built their lives on lies and betrayal. For Emily, it was not just the end of a trial. It was the end of a shadow that had haunted her since childhood. The truth was finally free, and with it came a strange sense of liberation, fragile yet overwhelming. She sat there for a moment, almost unable to move. Years of fear, confusion, and mistrust seemed to unravel before her eyes, like an old tapestry finally ripped apart at its seams. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of everything she had carried until this moment. She glanced toward Sarah. Her sister's face bore lines of exhaustion, but her eyes shone with a resilience Emily had never truly noticed before. It was as if Sarah's silent strength had been the anchor all along, keeping Emily tethered to hope even when she felt she was drowning in doubt. As they walked out of the courthouse together, cameras flashed and microphones reached out like grasping hands. Reporters shouted questions about the lies, the betrayal, the shocking revelation that had shaken the community to its core. But Emily no longer flinched under the weight of attention. For once, she stood tall, shoulders back, her voice calm. She didn't need to say much. Her silence spoke volumes. She was no longer the girl living in someone else's shadow. She had become the woman who carried the truth into the light. The world outside seemed different that day. The streets felt brighter, the air lighter, though Emily knew the scars would not fade overnight. Healing was never instant. It was a journey, and this was just the first step. But there was peace in knowing that the lies no longer held power. She had reclaimed her life. That evening, Emily and Sarah sat on the porch of their childhood home, the same home where so many secrets had been buried. The autumn air carried a chill, but neither of them moved inside. For years, their family had been fractured by silence, each lie carving deeper divides between them. But tonight, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, there was something unspoken but deeply understood. They had survived together. Emily finally whispered, "I thought I lost everything." Sarah reached over, her hand warm and steady. "You didn't lose everything. You just lost the people who were never meant to stay." The words sank deep into Emily's heart, soft but powerful. For so long, she had mourned what was taken from her, the family she thought she had, the innocence she had clung to, the trust that had been shattered. But Sarah was right. What she gained in return was far more valuable: clarity, freedom, and an unshakable bond with the only person who had truly stood by her side. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were nights when she woke from dreams drenched in fear, and mornings when the weight of the past still pressed heavily on her chest. But with each step, she grew stronger. She volunteered at a local shelter, offering kindness to strangers who carried their own silent battles. She spoke at community events, telling her story not as a tale of tragedy, but as proof that truth, no matter how painful, can set us free. People listened. They cried. They saw themselves in her words. And slowly, Emily transformed from victim to voice, from someone who had been silenced to someone who refused to stay quiet any longer. Her story became a ripple, spreading outward, reminding others that betrayal does not define you, that lies cannot hold you forever, and that resilience is born not in moments of comfort, but in the fire of suffering. She learned that the past does not disappear, but it does not have to dictate the future. One night, months later, Emily stood alone by the ocean. The waves crashed violently, each one retreating only to rise again. She thought about how life mirrored the sea, relentless, unpredictable, sometimes merciless, but also how it kept moving, cleansing, renewing. She let the salt air fill her lungs and whispered into the night, "I am still here." It wasn't just survival, it was victory. Her journey carried a lesson for anyone who had ever been broken by betrayal. The people who wound us may think they've silenced us, but the truth always has a way of rising. Emily's scars would never fully disappear, but they had become part of her strength, a roadmap of resilience carved into her very soul. And as for Sarah, she too found healing in the aftermath. She and Emily repaired what years of secrets had tried to destroy. Their bond grew unshakable, forged in the fire of shared pain but tempered by forgiveness. Together, they decided that the cycle of silence and deceit that had haunted their family would end with them. They would no longer be prisoners of someone else's lies. Their story may have started with betrayal, but it ended with redemption. For every person watching, listening, or reading this, there is something universal in Emily's journey. Maybe you've felt the sting of betrayal from someone you trusted. Maybe you've carried secrets that weren't yours to bear. Maybe you've questioned if truth was even worth uncovering when lies felt easier. But Emily's story reminds us all, the truth is worth it. Even when it hurts, even when it shatters everything you thought you knew, it is the only foundation upon which real healing can stand. So the legacy she leaves behind isn't just her survival. It is her courage to face the shadows and step into the light. It's her refusal to be defined by the deceit of others. It's her proof that even in the darkest night, dawn eventually comes. And as the credits of her story roll in your mind, remember this. Emily's battle for truth is not just hers. It belongs to anyone who has ever been silenced, overlooked, or betrayed. Her voice is a reminder. Your story matters too. And now to you, the one listening right now. If Emily's journey moved you, if it made you pause, if it made you think of your own hidden scars, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to Truth Unraveled, a place where stories like Emily's are given the voice they deserve, where secrets meet the light, and where the resilience of the human spirit is celebrated.